Right, perfect. Well, welcome, Paul, to another episode of the Hummingbird. First of all, tell the audience how you're doing today.
Doing well. Nice to be back on, and we can do this as often as you like, because this is right up my alley. Getting up here to just be able to talk about things and give my thoughts and views on different things. So
Okay, awesome. Well, as I was mentioning to you a few moments ago, I actually have seen a lot of interest from people, and actually they are interested to know things that you and I already know and might seem or might sound as simple, but actually these are questions that people genuinely don't know or genuinely don't understand how they work actually. So one of the first questions uh, I would like to talk about blindness in general, and of course, blindness as a spectrum. There are a lot of people that think that either you are completely blind or you can see 100%, and that's not true. So I would like to know your take on that.
so there really is a difference in total blindness and visual impairment, just as there is with deafness and hearing impairment, and it's probably stronger or more well pronounced because there are so many different conditions that cause visual impairment, and they have so many different effects on eyesight. It's not just nearsighted and farsighted. It's glaucoma, and it's retinitis pigmentosa, and so many other things that I don't fully understand, because for me, it's just total blindness with the exception of some light perception. But it's definitely incorrect to say you're either blind or you're sighted. There are many, many, many people who are visually impaired, and to all sorts of different degrees and with all sorts of different things that may happen. People with tunnel vision, people that can see far away well but not close up, or vice versa. People whose color, the ability to see color, is affected more than in other situations. So, suffices to say, visual impairment is an extreme scale, and there's moderate and severe and mild levels, but definitely not at all the case that there are people who are blind and people who are sighted. Many, many fall in between that.
Well, it was a surprise to me to know that a lot of people didn't know this, or they at least thought of blindness as 0 or 100%. Uh, how often do you find yourself answering this question, or people asking you, "Oh, so you're completely blind," or what's your percentage?
I personally don't get the question very often because it's pretty obvious in my case. I don't deal with the situation where someone says, well, you could see the board yesterday. Why can't you see it today? How are you able to notice this particular thing yesterday, but till a week ago you couldn't? So I don't deal with that personally. So I've known many people who do, who have said it's easier in one sense to be completely blind or not, because with visual impairments, your sight may vary on a daily basis. It may vary based on how much you've used your vision that day, whether or not you have your glasses, contact, magnifier, etc. So for me, it's not really an issue. It's not something that comes up where I have to explain why I couldn't see something today that I know was able to see last week. So I don't deal with it, but many people do, and that's one of the hardest parts about dealing with low vision, is that not everything for someone with low vision works for everyone with low vision. I mean, magnification is one thing. If it's just a matter of something is too small, you can magnify it. But you get into things like color contrast, and you get into things like which font is better for this person or that person. It becomes a lot more difficult.
Hey, totally. I do. Um, when I started out working for Sunu, that was actually one of the things that I understood first. Like there is not a tool that is like fits all needs, or like, oh yeah, this is going to work for everybody. Not even, of course, the Sunu band. And I think it is important that people understand that the fact that, you know what, as you were mentioning, this magnifier is not going to work for everyone.
I mean, the concept does carry over into other disabilities too. When you think about hearing aids, there are some people whose hearing loss can be helped with a hearing aid, and some who can't. Is it a nerve issue? Is it something else? Uh, I have a hearing loss in one ear that was caused by scar tissue from having tubes put in my ears too many times. So if you do a hearing test, and you just test the nerve, it works fine. But because the scar tissue is there blocking it, um, it affects it. So technically, there's nothing wrong, and technically, there is something wrong. If that makes sense, there's no way to get in there unless they had some way of you know zapping the tissue out, with some sort of laser or something that there's no way to fix that. A hearing aid helps, but you can't fix the scar tissue. So it really is, people with a physical disability that may not be able to move an arm or leg a certain way. Uh, you can help some people with certain things. You can't help everybody with the same certain thing. Just like you wouldn't say to someone, "Well, you need a wheelchair," because you have a situation where you may be limping today and having a rough day, maybe arthritis. So just automatically give the person a wheelchair. You can't do that.
Of
So
course.
it is it's especially difficult. Maybe the better term is it's especially it takes a lot of effort to understand how different visual conditions are affected, and how you help someone with that particular condition.
Okay, thank you so much. One of the follow-up questions, and now that we kind of covered the like the variety of the spectrum, there was another question that people didn't understand, or basically the difference between being blind and being visually impaired.
Right, and so blindness tends to mean that you have no ability to see, or that your ability to see is so limited that it is of little value. Now, I don't mean value to you as a person, but I mean value in terms of what it is able to help you and assist you in doing. Visual impairment just means you have vision, but it's not completely at the level of someone with full sight. Something is affected. One or more aspects of your vision doesn't function the way that it would in the case of someone who has full, typical, complete vision.
Okay, awesome. All right. Uh, so before I jump into any a more specific topic, is there you something that you would like to discuss that we have discussed yet right now?
I guess I would just say, if you're not sure, I mean, by all means, if you know someone, feel free to ask them. If you're around someone and you know that there's a visual issue, or a loss of vision, and you just don't understand it, most of the time, if you ask somebody, they'll explain it. And you know don't worry about the instances where someone might not, you catch somebody on a day where they just don't feel like dealing with it. They've got so many other things that they're dealing with. They don't feel like educating you today. That does happen. We're all in that boat. Sometimes we just don't feel like educating people that day. But usually, if you ask, people will explain it. And it's probably better if you do know, especially if you're going to spend any time around that person so that you can understand what to do and not to do so that if they have vision, they can use it as effectively as possible. And if they don't, then you know that. So you can really do things that are most beneficial for them. And don't frustrate yourself either.
Okay, awesome. So be open and don't be afraid that person might take it wrong because they're not going to take it wrong. It's basically a question, uh, and it
Yeah,
will help
generally,
you,
if they
right?
do, it's just they're just having one of those days. We all have them where I just don't feel like explaining this today. I've just got too much on my mind. I just don't feel like explaining it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And well, it's great that you were mentioning this part because a lot of people, I don't know, people who have nothing to do with the community, they tend to be a bit rude, if I may say that, when it comes to offering assistance. If you should offer assistance, let's say, oh, you know what, I'm going to work at APH today, right? And I'm waiting for the bus or I'm waiting for the train, and I don't know, how often do you find yourself in the situation where you're minding your business and someone is all of a sudden insisting that they want to help you or that they want to I don't know, but yeah, they want to help you.
It really, when I was using the bus more often, you would run into that on occasion. Sometimes it's help that you don't need. Sometimes it's help that could be useful, especially if there's an unusual thing going on, an obstacle in a strange place that isn't normally there, or people that are blocking the way that you normally take because they're just talking or whatever. And sometimes you just have to use your discretion and say, is it going to be easier to just accept this help on this one occasion and move on with life, or do I make a big fuss out of it and not? Sometimes you just have to assess the situation and understand that maybe something isn't ideal, but if you deal with it, it probably is going to never come up again. I mean, there are some people that just really get upset. You try to help them and they don't need the help, and they'll let you know it, and they'll be rude about it. I don't find that beneficial. Whereas I may not need your help, but if you insist, I may allow you to do whatever it is you think you need to do, even if it's just so you'll go on your way.
Okay, I think I get it now. Like, okay, so yes, you want to offer your help. I'm going to accept your help so that you don't feel bad about yourself.
Or so that it might even be self-serving. Okay, you've asked me 4 times. The only way I'm going to get rid of you is to let you do it. If for one of the times when I had a guide dog and it was going to put the dog in a tough situation, then I would probably say no. But if I'm walking with a cane and I don't need your help, but your help isn't going to hurt me to take it, I may just take it so that you will go away and move on to something else.
Okay, I see.
You do have to sometimes just look at your situation and say, what's going on here? If I don't accept this person, seeming to show signs of being belligerent, so okay, let's just accept the help and let them move on so that they can go find something else to do.
Okay, so what would be a good middle ground between because that's actually I have experienced in the past, where I don't know, I'm not 100% sure the person needs some help or some guidance. But let's say, for example, I usually go to events, for example, right? So conventions and such. And I would say navigating indoors can be a lot more difficult. And I don't know, I might see like, oh yeah, so this hall is it has nothing to do with the convention, for example. And I do want to ask like, oh yeah, do you need some guidance or some help? What would be some middle ground between, I don't know, asking and accepting and out for an answer, and that's it, move on with your day, or what would be some good approach there?
I don't think there's anything wrong at all with just asking someone. You know, they may be a very competent traveler, but they're in a new place and they may very well just not know where they're going. So, by all means, it's good to ask. You know, do you need assistance? Can I help you with anything here? Do you need assistance navigating here? Whatever it is, something like that, where you've asked a question where the person can make their choice. Yes, they need help. No, they don't. Or maybe they do, but it's only something as simple as, you know, is this uh, the C level of rooms or whatever? Or I think, you know, room 26 is coming up. Is that right? So they may need help, and it may be something very similar. So, or very simple. So sure, yeah, ask and feel free to ask, and just realize that they, you know, most of the time will tell you if they need some assistance. You know, you're assisting someone just like you might need assistance in an unfamiliar place. So by all means, feel that's a good thing.
Okay, awesome. What about touching the person when you are offering assistance? Yeah, a lot of people have told me like, you know what, don't touch me because I'm not aware of you being there, so I might be scared if you touch me and ask for assistance. A lot of people are the opposite, where they're like, oh yeah, so maybe a question and then a tap on the shoulder perhaps uh, would be just enough. How do you feel about that?
I don't think you're going to find universal agreement on this. I think that's part of the problem is that uh, 10 people are going to have 10 different views on it, or at least four or five. So I would say, especially in a loud, crowded area, you may speak to someone, they may not answer you back, and it may simply be because there's no way that they can really be sure you're talking to them. That's one of the biggest problems. Somebody may ask you a question, you don't know they're talking to you, so you don't answer them. I've done that. And then people have said something, and I've said, "Oh, you were talking to me. Okay, you were so far away that I couldn't tell, or by the sound of it, it sounded like you may have been talking to somebody else." So I don't mind a tap on the shoulder. Um, Now, grabbing someone is another issue entirely. Grabbing somebody's shoulder and trying to pull on them, that's you just don't do unless you have uh, an emergency, or someone's in imminent danger and they're about to fall down a huge flight of steps, for instance, or they're about to get hurt, and it's pretty clear that that's what's going to happen if you don't stop it. And otherwise, yeah, a simple touch is enough, especially if they don't seem to be responding to you.
Okay, that's actually a great observation when you're in at least, for example, crowded places. Because actually, for example, when I am talking to someone, usually the eye contact is the one that tells you that I am talking to you. I may not know your name, but I'm talking and I'm looking at you, and you know that I'm looking at you, and you already understand, oh, so that this person is referring to me, right? So in that case, you're saying the tap on the shoulder would be a good um, a good approach, or do you think like a description, for example, hey, you, Mister, with the guide dog, for example, um, do you think that would be easier, or what would be your best approach there?
It's I think any of those are acceptable. Understand that they all have instances where they may not work. You know, some people don't want to be touched no matter what. Just they don't want to be touched. Some people, if you don't touch them and they're not 100% sure you're talking to them, they may not respond to you no matter what. So you're not going to get it right every time. I think that's just the bottom line. There are going to be instances where your approach isn't what somebody else wants. And if we can understand that we're not going to always get it right, that makes things easier because in some of these areas there just isn't a 100% guaranteed way to get it right every time. There are things you definitely just don't want to do. Like I said, you don't want to just grab somebody and try to pull them and steer them. But when it comes to most of these other things, there are going to be personal preferences and things that people might be more or less open to, just depending on their personality, who they are, where they are, whether or not they perceive that there might be some threats around them. But generally, any of these things that we're talking about now, the tap on the shoulder, the simply trying to refer to them, sir, ma'am, any of that stuff, is going to be fine. You know, the exceptions, I think we need to remember, exceptions don't and shouldn't be what defines how you do things. Too often, that's the case. Well, in one instance, this happened. You know, the other 20, everything was fine, but because of this one, I'm going to never do this way again. Instead of letting the general rule define how you handle things, we let the one exception do it, and that's probably not the best way to go.
I think that applies to everything, right? Like, so you try something new and it doesn't work, don't worry about it not going to work in the future, right?
I mean, some things are common sense. I mean, nobody wants to be grabbed and pulled.
Absolutely,
I can't think of anybody that I would run into that would be like, "Would you be okay with this?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, sure." I really don't think that you'd find anybody.
absolutely. Yeah, common sense. I would say that would be the first thing on the list, right? Uh, what happens when you agree, like, oh yes, I need help finding this store or this street, for example, right? And uh, well, a lot of people are going to be confused as to what next. I do want to help you, but I don't know how. So, what would be the tip? Basically, stand in front of me and let me grab either your shoulder or your elbow. And I think, and again, I believe there are techniques, and that depends on the country and that depends on the region. But what would be a standard, for example?
So, the best thing is, since you're the one that needs the help, then you should dictate how you get it, and that may be a street. It may be something as simple as it's a restaurant that we're walking into, and you may have to say to the person, "May I take your arm?" Or if they're standing beside you, you go ahead and just take their arm, and say, you know, I'll follow you. Give them some sort of cue or clue as to what you want them to do, so they're not having to guess because you can't assume they know. If you're the one that wants to help and you need the help, you should be comfortable with explaining to somebody how to do it and how not to do it. If you leave it up to them and they get it wrong, you can't really get upset over that. You should take the time and make the effort. It's not a big effort, but show them the best way to help you.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Yeah, I think that's going to help a lot of people. So there were a lot of questions, as simple as can a blind person or can a person with a visual impairment use a phone? You and I both know the answer, but what are your takes on that?
So I assume we're referring simply to smartphones, not to just the regular
Yeah,
old
smartphones.
fashioned phones. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
most definitely. However, the phone needs to have a screen reader that's built in or that can be accessed easily. So, for instance, if I just walk into somebody's house, I can't just use their laptop computer that's just sitting out without a screen reader. Now that narrator is built into Windows 10, I could, in theory, just turn narrator on their computer and do some basic things. With a smartphone, there are many of them that have either no screen reader or very limited. So those would be inaccessible if you have no vision at all. You may be able to use a zoom or a magnifier if you have some vision, if you can figure out how to get it turned on their phone. So Apple were the first ones to do this when it comes to the modern smartphones. We're not going to go way back into some of the old things, but the iPhones and all iOS devices have what's called voiceover built in. It's turned on with a particular gesture. And so any iPhone can be used. I can take somebody's iPhone that I know nothing about and help them figure out how to change a setting or how to use an app if I'm familiar with it. On Android phones, there's something called TalkBack that is, I don't want to say it's not the same the way it's turned on, but I do think it has changed over the years, and I'm not an Android user. It has improved. Android accessibility is definitely getting a lot better. In my opinion, it still lacks behind iPhone accessibility, but there are a number of people who are blind who just love Android and wouldn't use anything else. So, uh, my opinion is find what you're comfortable with, whether it's one or the other or some combination of both, and use it. But absolutely, a smartphone is usable so long as it has that technology in it. There are some smartphones that don't have it, and those wouldn't be usable. A lot of the old flip phones and things like that. The only thing you could really do with them is make calls. Somebody could take a picture, but you couldn't do anything with it.
Okay, makes sense. So basically, Android, iOS, those are the ones that are leading right now accessibility for smartphones, right?
Right, and there are Android. The thing with Android that makes it more difficult is that there are so many different levels or software versions of Android, and they may or may not be employed the same way in every system. So it's a lot more difficult. Uh, Whereas with an iDevice, it pretty much works the same way no matter which phone it is, uh, except of course, certain features will be different based on your version of iOS and your phone, but most of the main stuff is the same. So you could hand me an iPhone 7, you can hand me a 12 mini, you can hand me one of the Pro models, and I could get it working because iOS is, some people call it restrictive. Others say it's just built the way it's built, and you can't make changes to it and modify it. That means that if it works on one iOS device, it should work on any of them.
you are a an iOS user, that doesn't mean that Android is not accessible, but it's basically not standardized, or I don't know what would be the word to describe an Android, or the Android in general.
If you use, let's say, a Google Pixel, your experience may very well be different than if you use a Galaxy phone. Some things are going to be the same, but the talkback gestures are still going to be similar, but because the phones are different and the things that they do may be different, just because you can use one, you may have trouble with the other. There are going to be one of the other differences between iOS and Android is that Braille support is built right into iOS. But you have to give something called Braille back on Android. So you need TalkBack and you need Braille back. Whereas with iOS, you just use VoiceOver and it's already there.
Okay.
And now, TalkBack is built in. Uh, I've done some testing on some Google phones, and I've never tested one of the Samsung phones. I'm sure I could turn TalkBack on either one. Is it exactly the same way? An Android expert would be better to speak to that.
Okay. Well, yeah. I guess that makes sense. As a user of iOS as well, I would say, as you were mentioning, it would take me a bit of a learning curve to adapt to Android. But right now, I don't see the need of moving to Android. Right.
Right, right. And it doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of things that Apple could do to make iOS easier. It just means that out of the box, it has been the preferred platform for people who are blind. And while Android is gaining in popularity and Android accessibility podcasts and websites popping up, it still feels like, even if it's not the case, it still feels like it's still lagging behind.
Okay.
With
Interesting.
that said, it's definitely improving, and you've got your diehards that will use Android and only Android. Most definitely,
Nice.
you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we're talking about phones, but at some point you were mentioning um, laptops, or computers in general. You were mentioning that Microsoft 10 now has a built-in feature for screen reader. Is that the same for Mac, or what do you see there?
So Mac's been ahead of the curve on that. They've had VoiceOver built into their computers for a very long time, and it is a good screen reader. You don't have to pay for one. Essentially, Mac's being more expensive, you are paying for one, even though you're not. Everybody's paying the same price for the Mac, and you're getting the screen reader built in. In Windows, the narrator is not new either. I think even XP had narrator, but it was so hard to get to it that, and it did so little that it was not very beneficial. Now Microsoft seems to be trying to get narrator to be so good that it's legitimately a competitor in the screen reader market, and they're doing that. And some of the advantages they have is they can build narrator to work especially well with Edge, for instance. There was a time when the only screen reader that would work with Edge before it was Edge Chromium, and when it was the old Edge, if you didn't have narrator, you couldn't use it, or you could use it very restricted. Now that Edge has gone to Edge Chromium, it works equally well with all the screen readers, generally speaking.
Okay, interesting. I'm learning a lot as well, and thank you so much for that.
And see, it's like anything else. 6 months from now, something could have changed dramatically, and what I'm saying today could be totally changed, and it not be accurate in 6 months.
Absolutely. But again, you're the accessibility Jedi, so I'm sure that right now well, that's what's going on right now. Um, Now you were mentioning Microsoft's narrator now truly competing with other softwares. What is your experience, or you, I don't know if you personally use just the software that Mac offers you, or the narrator from Microsoft, or if you pay an additional software. Uh, what is your situation, and why?
Well, let's start with Mac first because I have tried to learn Mac and have learned some things and some basic things, but I've kind of hit a wall. I kind of hit a brick wall, and haven't invested the time to get really good at Mac. So that may happen at some point, but uh, I think we are at work, especially like I have been for the last year teaching a longtime Mac user Windows. So at least where we are at work, the trend is to, especially for the visually impaired folks, to stay on Windows, and that is that's been pretty consistent. And for me, I have used a one of the JAWS products for a very long time. So JAWS for Windows Screen Reader, I've used it for many years. There are people that have used it longer, but I still prefer it for a number of reasons. It's still the most robust to me. It still does the most things, and you know, it's real easy to get in touch with support and people that make it, and I still prefer it. I mean, I appreciate narrator when JAWS doesn't work correctly. Narrator's a great help to make sure things are working correctly, and it does have some benefits and some good uses. But at this point in time, JAWS to me is still superior to the other options.
Okay. All right. So I guess we have a winner for now.
Hashtag not a sponsor, right? So definitely throw that in.
Yeah. Hashtag not a sponsor. But I mean, it's actually good, and that's something that I've learned as well. If a product is truly good, or a product is truly something what a user needs, people will always talk good about it, or basically um, well, yeah, sponsor if you may say, but that's basically the word of mouth marketing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that you there are other options on Windows, no doubt, and they have their place and they have their benefit and the things that they're good for. I just always been a JAWS user, probably always will be.
Okay, awesome.